Hello, this is a narration over my painting process in ArtRage to create this happy frog. I didn't have an idea of what I was going to do, and this is usually the case when I start a digital painting. I had chosen a reference of Pixabay that I thought was quite interesting, and it was just of a garden frog ornament, I think it was, which just looked happy. And I like the lighting of it. And here, as you can see, I'm just building up the colours from dark to light. I've only got 2 layers selected here. I generally always have this when I start a painting. The bottom layer is my canvas layer, or my canvas colour, which is just the fill of a neutral colour, and the one above it is where I'm putting all my paint. I know I can change the canvas colour in the canvas settings, but I never do that. I always leave that as default. Also, with the canvas settings, I'll always leave it to default. I never put any different types of canvas texture on. I think I've always been happy with the default one, so that's the only one I ever use. The canvas lighting obviously is set to on to get that impasto effect, but that's the only way I use the canvas. Just building up colours from dark to light at the moment. I'm using the same hue for all of it. It's a straightforward increase. Here I'm using the custom brush. I switched to the custom brush, and this is because I've managed to create a blend brush which I am finally happy with within ArtRage. And this blend brush has the feel of a digital blend brush. If ever you use any other digital art program, Photoshop or Critter or GIMP or even Corel Painter to a certain extent, the blend brush or smudge tool that it has feels very digital. It doesn't feel too natural, but it does a really good job of blending out the different colours, and that's what I wanted to do here, because I've laid down the colours with my thick oil brush, and I never really found a decent way of blending to my satisfaction with the oil brush. So I've managed to create in the custom brush a blend brush, which is simple really because it's based upon the canvas texture 2 in the artistic category, I think, and all I did was turn it into a blend brush and kept all the settings for it, and that was pretty much it. Playing around with colour, just building up the levels of lightness and increasing the level of detail, increasing the form of this frog. It's all starting to come together now. Again, as you can see, I'm just sticking to the single layer with all of this paint. Every now and again, I've now got 3 layers. I take a snapshot. If I'm happy with the paint that I've laid down and the painting as its current progress, I create sometimes a backup of the layer and stick right to the bottom of my layer list and make it invisible. One reason is it's almost a snapshot. I may say, oh, I don't really like where I'm going with this, and I may restore my layer potentially, although that rarely happens. What I seem to use it more for, which is by accident, is that I bring it in later on as a blend mode layer to add in a bit of the original detail, a bit of variation, a bit of the original colour. Sometimes I might lose the painting a little bit, and that just brings back the original idea. I'm using the airbrush, as you can see, which is set on 0 hardness, which will spray out quite finely to do a little bit of blending. But despite all the blending that I've done and the airbrush I've applied, I've still maintained a level of painterliness about this frog. Added in a new layer and added in some background colours. Not really sure where I'm going from this. The background that I've laid in, the colours for it are very similar to the reference. This is quite an important part of the picture. As you can see, little reflection, flipped the layer and reduced the opacity. I've now just exported from ArtRage as a PSD and opened it up in the free GIMP tool. GIMP, I don't know if you know, is very much like Photoshop, but it's a free version of it, mainly because it was originally written on Linux and has been ported over to run on Windows. But I've found that this is very useful for tweaking colours. ArtRage has a very limited way of adjusting colours. It has a single filter to do that and is quite slow to update. But with GIMP it's instantaneous. And as you can see here, I'm playing around with a few ideas. I know I don't like the original colour setup. It's quite saturated and it's all green. There's no hue changes for it. Here I'm creating layer upon layer, playing around with a few ideas, and eventually I'll save this as a PSD. I will then open up in ArtRage, because you can not only open up native ArtRage files, but you can open up PSDs as well. Therefore in ArtRage I will see all these layers that I have created and use copy and paste to clipboard to copy one of the layers here that I've created into a layer of my original painting. Back to ArtRage then, there you can see with all the layers, that's the PSD that I've just opened up, and just going through and seeing which layer I like the most and just re-importing, which is just copy and pasting into my original picture. Therefore I've taken the colours, the colour adjustments that I've done in GIMP, and applied it to my painting. Now I'm playing around with the background. This was a painting that I did 3-4 years ago, I think, that I just put in as a background, which I do sometimes. I overlay my old paintings into my new artwork with backgrounds, or even overlaying on the original painting to see what effect it might have. I'm playing and using the warp tool, which is a new feature of ArtRage 5. I'm not happy with the overall shape of the frog. I want something slightly different, and I therefore flattened the eyes and removed his little crown that he's got. I'm quite happy with the overall shape. It looks quite goofy and quite strange. Not quite so happy, almost slightly out of it. Playing around, which I do sometimes, in copying and pasting my original picture into different layers, resizing, changing the blend mode a little bit, seeing what happens. As I said at the start of this video, I don't really have an idea of where I'm going with this. I almost make it up as I go along. The background here, got the good old paint tube out and using the blend brush. It's a cloudy one that I think I created, which was based upon a tutorial in YouTube, which really disperses all these colours and gives it a cloudy background, or it's a way of creating skies and clouds really easily. As you can see here, my layers are now starting to increase because I'm starting to apply effects onto my painting. Still not happy with that green, so I'm playing around with blend modes and applying wash overlays. Here I'm using a colour layer and setting it to a really desaturated value, so it's just showing black and white, the original form values. I have an idea. I'm going to use the gradient fill. As you can see, I'm just moving on to the gradient fill to apply a different colour over the top of the colour overlay, because that green just wasn't working. I don't know what will work, so I'm going through the different categories within the gradient tool and seeing if anything looks okay. This colour setup looks quite interesting. There's just a gut feeling that this looks, although the lines are not quite in the right place, I can still blend them out, but I do like the overall colour setup. The background doesn't quite fit in yet. As you can see, I'm moving around quite a few different layers, trying to bind it all together, merging down a little bit there to simplify things. When I'm happy with all of my blend modes and my layers, I do like to merge down as soon as possible. I think the overall frog is a little bit too bright. I'm playing around with a few blend layers here. Again, this is bringing up one of the layers that I've created as a backup and just pulled it right to the top, changed the blend layers a little bit, blend mode a little bit to see what can happen. Added in a few little details, just refining. I still don't like the brightness of the frog though. I do want to tone that one down, and what I'll do is Over a period of time my paintings do get a little bit bright, so I need to tone it down. Here I'm using the pastel to add in a little bit of texture. I am changing the canvas properties on the individual layer, I think it's layer texture, and using different canvas textures to work with the pastel, which obviously the pigment, and this is what it's simulating, grips onto the canvas that you've selected, which is almost as part of the final render that I generally do. I've got the basic form, I've got enough detail that I'm pretty happy with. I just want to add in a little bit of extra sparkle onto my pictures, and this, I don't always use it, haven't been using it too recently, but it's useful sometimes just to add an extra layer of detail over the top. Again, merging down a little bit there because I was happy with the texture I've applied. I'm playing with a blend mode, dulling the image down because it was way too bright, and this technique I use quite a lot, by applying a darker overlay and then just erasing away for where all the light is. It really does bring out the overall form and makes it look almost 3D. As you can see, I'm just toggling backwards and forwards, and you can see the difference almost immediately, and it fits in with the ambient lighting in the background being almost a stormy background. Flipping again, doing the old reflection technique on the layer with lower opacity because I've now changed the colour of my frog, so I needed to have redone that. Haven't done it until this time, but I did flip the canvas, and I noticed straight away that his left eye looks really weird. It really stood out, and it's always really useful to flip the canvas whenever you can because it gives a fresh perspective on what looks slightly strange, and that eye really did literally stick out, so I had to use warp to just pull it back in again. At the moment I'm using the palette knife to bring in some final details, some final lines, which works really well to just trim all the lines off. It also works well to trim all those little edges that are sticking out. It almost works like, I think it's a distorto tool in Corel Painter, where it just pulls all the paint in and just gives a nice smooth outline. And because it's a palette knife and it's working with the paint that I laid down, it actually makes it look quite painterly and still maintains that. Overall, I think I'm pretty happy. I had no idea, I had no preconception of where I was going with this, like I said at the start, but I'm happy. There's something telling me that this is probably okay. The detail levels are pretty good, the colours are okay, the form looks reasonable. So at this stage I will import it back into GIMP again and just play around with the colours just to touch things up, enhance the colours slightly. GIMP has got good selection of auto enhance, for example contrast and colours and those kind of things to make sure things look balanced. And also it has a map where you can increase the bump levels, so you can increase the levels of texture, which I really like to do at the end of my paintings. I used to do it more in the past when my paintings looked slightly blurry to bring out the more painterly look, but now I've started using the oil a little bit more often. I get more straight lines and I get more sharp lines, and it looks more painterly anyway. As you can see, I'm bringing out the bump slightly. This will lift paint off the canvas just a little bit more and make it look a bit more like ArtRage as well, as if it has been painted. Again, I've brought back into the image that I've saved back into ArtRage and separate layer, just sign it, and that should be just about it. That's my happy frog that I've done. Oh, here I'm using my usual technique of adding a layer with bright white on a multiply, just for a few final touches to see whether that works to imply an impasto effect. As you can see, zooming in and then zooming out, you can see with the canvas lighting you have the texture of the paint tool and the paint tube in the background, and all of the impasto that I've initially had or added in a bit later on. to give that overall painterly effect and something different that you don't get from other digital art programs. Okay, that's it.